One-on-one is where we talk to some of the top leaders in sports media and sports technology. Today, we're pleased to be joined by Lee Berke, President and CEO of LHB Sports Entertainment and Media. Lee has specialized in collaborating with sports properties and media companies in developing multimedia networks and enhancing the value and content rights across a growing array of distribution technologies. He founded LHB Sports back in 2001 and has worked on media efforts with multiple broadcasters and streaming outlets, along with over 60 teams and properties across all the professional sports leagues, including the Premier League and in international motorsports. Some of Lee's highlights along the way: collaborating with Gray TV and Kiswe in developing the Phoenix Suns and Phoenix Mercury over the air and streaming networks, working with Kiswe in developing the Utah Jazz Plus streaming network, and with Tegna in developing their OTA networks for the Seattle Kraken and Indiana Fever. In addition, he co-authored the original business plan for the New York Yankees Yes Network. He also helped to negotiate with Verizon the first ever streaming rights agreement for NFL Thursday Night Football. Prior to consulting, Lee also headed up marketing for Madison Square Garden and MSG Network. He received his BA and MBA from the University of Michigan. Lee, thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Tell us a little bit about your background. Obviously, the MSG days were quite a while ago, but give us a sense of kind of how you got here today.
The through line for all of this is I commercialized a hobby. It's funny. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and I would look at the TV column, and I'd love the business little dots at the end of it, and in terms of what was going on in the industry. And I'd look at the Cleveland teams, which grantedly are kind of a struggle. But I'd start to be interested in how they were getting people there and what their television deals were. And that kind of carried me through. I mean, I went to Michigan. I stayed there a full 6 years and got my MBA, but always was interested in the business side of sports and entertainment and media, and ended up working for an ad agency, part of Gray Advertising. And they were interested in bringing in MSG Network. And I brought them in as a client, and I ended up becoming VP of marketing for the network. And at a time when regional sports networks were really growing, they brought together at one point the New York Yankees and the Knicks and the Rangers all together on one network, which was a huge breakthrough on basic cable, and sort of grew from there. And ended up collaborating on the business plan for Yes Network, and then early 2000 hung out my shingle, and it's grown ever since. And it's not just been individual teams anymore. It's leagues and conferences and different media platforms, all attempting to deliver content directly to their fans. And that's really changed the game, literally and figuratively, in terms of the business that's being done, and ultimately the asset valuations of the properties that people are buying and selling.
It's such a turbulent and chaotic time right now for the RSN business, and you have been at the intersection of this sports and media landscape, again, from the planning days of Yes. I affectionately call you the RSN whisperer. Is there a right model out there today for this business?
Multi-part answer. First of all, there's a wrong model. And the wrong model is the traditional model that, by the way, everybody profited from greatly all the way back to 1969 when MSG Network was first launched. That was launched by Chuck Dolan in New York City. And it was dependent on the growth of cable television and pay television. And as long as that penetration grew and grew and grew, and the affiliate fees grew and grew and grew, then it worked extremely well. It was a virtuous cycle. And then we plateaued in the mid 2010s and definitely started to go downhill after the pandemic. You're seeing drop-offs in pay TV still of 10 to 12% per year in video subs. And so that model traditionally developed dependent on cable affiliate fees just doesn't work anymore. Diamond is certainly a flashpoint because of all the debt they took out, but it's not just Diamond, it's every RSN owner out there facing the same issues. So the right way to go is to go where the fans are. I mean, ultimately, that's where an RSN grew in the first place. Fans were moving to cable television. And there was an opportunity to drive the growth of that technology through two revenue streams, through ad sales and through affiliate fees. The reality is now the maximum number of TV households on pay TV maxed out at just over 100 million in the early 2010s. Now it's maybe 50 to 60 million. But those fans are still out there. They're just watching other screens. So the models, plural, that can work here is to be where they're at. They are watching on broadcast television. And the reality is that with the exception of news and sports, nothing else really pulls on broadcast television anymore. So you need to be there. You can be seen on 10 of 10 homes. You need to be on streaming. There's a growing percentage of, they're called BBOs, broadband only households. They're seen in 30 to 40% of all TV households out there are broadband only. They only get their TV through the internet. You still need to be on pay TV in some fashion, but that's a small, again, it's a large number, maybe the largest number out there in terms of pay television and subscriber television, but it is shrinking, but you still need to have some presence. So it's streaming, it's broadcast, it's some pay TV. There's a variety of answers out there and they're being implemented right now. But the one thing that just doesn't work is the traditional model. When you're devoted to that one technology, ultimately that technology moves on. And that's sort of been the case with media throughout time. I mean, radio used to be the main delivery source for sports. Back 100 years ago, RCA created this, very complex technology called analog radio. And the way they decided to sell it was to create NBC Radio Network. And the first thing NBC Radio Network did was to get the rights to the World Series. And so people were buying hardware and listening to the software and selling advertising. And that's how sports really drove that technology. And you see it again and again. You see it through broadcast television. You see it through cable. You see it through satellite. Now you're seeing it through streaming. Sports drives all of this. The key is to stay ahead of that technology and not necessarily say I'm going to just be on the one technology that I'm used to. The reality is we've got to be flexible in how we move forward.
The trickle down effect of Diamond and the challenge right now in the RSN space, kind of everybody moving to a variety of different business models, creates some real challenges for the professional sports teams that have relied on receiving pretty decent sized checks from their RSN partners. What do you see as the outcome as these teams now are going to have to forego that guaranteed revenue to try to build up a DTC strategy?
Well, there's a variety of ways to go here. And part of this is the recognition that the ship has sailed. And that's a tough thing to do. I mean, look, the reality is for team executives, for league executives over the past 60 years, their rights became available every 3 to 5 to 7 years. They'd go out there, they would create a competitive marketplace, and I would help, and certainly other people would go out there and help them do that. And then they'd come back with a happy ending to the story. Our rights have doubled, our rights have tripled. And then everybody would, move on until the next rights deal expired. And so part of this is the realization that, you really have to stay ahead of where the trends are and not necessarily go back to the well for the same thing because it worked for you previously. It's like the pharmaceutical ads and the financial ads. Just because you had the results before doesn't mean you're going to get the same results going forward. So part of that's that realization that you have to do that. And part of it is being willing to utilize a variety of screens, number one, and that's using streaming, that's using broadcast. That's also realizing the increased value of advertising on these different screens. I mean, look, even though you may not have necessarily been noticing it too closely, the reality is that in many markets, RSNs are only seen by 30% or less of the TV households that are there. I've run into teams where half or more of the people on the team's staff can't watch their own games on television because they're on an RSN, and the RSN people are not coming out of college or entering into the labor force and purchasing a cable bundle anymore. They're purchasing broadband from a cable company, but not a cable bundle. So you need to realize that your advertising is being reduced in value. Your ad sales are lessening. Your marketing is lessening. So if you can create a relationship on a variety, or relationships on a variety of screens, and maximize and increase the value of your ad sales, obtain rights fees, and there are rights fees to be had, and there's guarantees to be had depending on the market, and utilizing broadcast, utilizing streaming, that there's ways to maybe not necessarily get back to where you were under the good old days of the cable-based RSN, but there are ways to build revenues and valuations and exposure that ultimately gets you back to where you need to be. Maybe not immediately, financially, but definitely across a range of screens. And you're also, and by the way, this is the ultimate issue. If you're not on the screens that people are watching, then you're losing your fan base. You're losing your next generation of fans. And if you can't get out there and be seen, I mean, look, the reality is I grew up a Cleveland baseball fan because I saw it on TV. Okay. And it grew from there. And that you're not born a Yankees fan or a Red Sox fan or a Tigers fan or whatever. You see it somewhere. You go to it. If you can't see it or go to it, then ultimately the valuation of your club is going to drop because you have a smaller and smaller fan base going forward. You need to reverse that trend. And while I can't say it's going to be totally pain-free, I do think that you're going to see so many different other opportunities by being on these screens and creating a revamped models on the regional sports network approach, that you will see growth in a variety of revenue streams and asset valuation going forward.
Mm-hmm. When you look at what the NBA, NHL, and Major League Baseball are doing, kind of not only behind the scenes, but actually have made it public, where they're starting to build out their own infrastructure to potentially solve for this. Do you think that's the ultimate solution, or do you still think we're 2 years away from figuring out the right, clear direction?
I think it's going to take some time to figure out, and I don't think there's going to be one right direction. I think people are going to come up with various approaches, and I will know this: even with the announced NBA deals, where, and I know there was the complaint that from Dolan saying, "Oh, we're becoming an NFL style league." Look, the reality is that Major League Baseball, NHL, NBA, their owners, the valuation of their teams are built in a substantial way on the local games that they can exploit on a regional basis on various forms of media. So while some of those games may be taken by the respective leagues, the bulk of those are going to reside with the teams. And so the teams are going to need to come up with a variety of approaches to reach the current fans and their new fans. I think that a one-size-fits-all solution probably isn't going to work in these leagues. I think you're going to have a variety of approaches, but the one through line is not just sticking to pay TV, because people are exiting and you need to go to where they're watching.
Yeah. We've been lucky enough to work with, companies like Monumental Sports, the Tennis Channel, Los Angeles Clippers on their ClipperVision service in terms of how they're thinking about personnel going forward, transforming their organizations. What do you see as the talent needs for some of these organizations going forward as they kind of lean into DTC directly or through partnerships?
It's interesting, because when you start having discussions with teams and leagues, they're pulling together various people from various disciplines, because it is an interdisciplinary approach and it demands a substantial focus on a range of media. It just can't be, and you need to have a broadcast person. I get that. But that broadcast person and persons need to also understand streaming. They need to understand the trends in media and where pay TV can and can't work anymore. They need to figure out the various approaches to streaming in terms of not just subscriptions, but utilizing e-commerce and ticketing and dynamic ad insertion, and the ways those work with the use of linear and coalescing with your sponsorship and marketing people as they sell in integrated sponsorships across the teams and leagues and conferences. So you really need people that are up to speed on all the screens that are out there, that understand the businesses within each of these screens and get how they work together. Because as compared to the person who would, come up and negotiate the cable deal every 5 years, you need somebody that can negotiate and figure out ways for developing a range of screens. Also, with DTC in particular, figuring out various ways of developing interactive approaches with those screens, developing additional revenues with those screens, and making sure it integrates effectively with all of your other media partners. It's an ongoing effort. It's not just a production effort, and it is something that's going to be going on a day-by-day basis as compared to an every 5 to 10 years basis.
Yeah. You've got two big players who have yet to enter the market in direct-to-consumer, Venue, partnership amongst some really big players, and then ESPN directly. I was at ESPN during the days of those 100 million households, where we woke up every morning and had a couple of $1 billion already in the bank, from those distributors. This world is different for ESPN today now. What do you see as the impact of those two players entering the market, and what impact will they have?
I think Venue is relatively limited. Even Fox said that Venue maybe will do 6 million subs. That was their initial projection. In certain respects, a lot of what Venue does is being covered already by Fubo, if people want to go there, or a little bit broader approach, YouTube TV, which certainly is doing well. And the reality is you will not have CBS attached to it in their sports, so I think that will sort of limit their growth. I think, when the Venue thing came out, you and I and probably a lot of people got a lot of comments saying, oh, what's going on here? It's a change. I think the lead got buried, and the lead is ESPN moving on to direct-to-consumer August of 2025. That has always been the last bastion, the last fortress for pay TV. We'll pay you, ESPN, $10 plus a month per sub because you're exclusive to cable. And ESPN, in a realization that they needed to at least develop their abilities and create sort of a life raft, created ESPN Plus in 2018. And it was set up so it wasn't necessarily the rights that they were showing on ESPN, so they could protect their affiliate fees for a while. And interestingly enough, that was done prior to the pandemic. And I recall Iger, in his first go-around with Disney, being asked about when is ESPN going to go on to streaming, and his response was maybe in 10 years or so. Then the pandemic hit, and the 1 to 2% drop-off in pay TV penetration became 10 to 12% drop-off ever since. And now it becomes existential. So you're ultimately, if you're ESPN, and by the way, if you're any cable distributor, pay TV programmer, you've got to put a foot on two icebergs. One is small but growing, and that's streaming, and the other is large but shrinking rapidly. Mm-hmm. Can't abandon or stay away from either. So the fact that cable TV is probably going to address in some fashion, and they already have with Charter, address what ESPN is going to be paid going forward on their affiliate fees versus the upside of putting all of ESPN's programming on a D2C basis. That's going to be their balancing act, but that's where their future is. You still don't want to ignore the cable bundle. It's still out there. It's shrinking, but it's large. It is aging as well. You have the DTC audience out there that is younger, more tech savvy. That's your future audience. So the fact that ESPN is making that move in about a year, I think is really going to be, it's critical for them. I'm sure there will be bumps in the road from a financial standpoint, but it's absolutely essential. If you're going to you have to reinvent yourself for the next generations that are watching content and increasingly watching it only via the internet.
Yeah, no question. We've talked about professional teams and leagues and sports, but you've been involved in college as well, and have helped the University of Oklahoma several times kind of evaluate their media strategy and figuring out. Obviously, there's, again, talking about chaos and disruption going on in the professional sports landscape. It's happening in a big way in the college landscape with realignment and everything that's going on there. So when you look at how colleges are going to have to drive new revenue streams, do you see this as an opportunity as well? And what is the work that you're doing with the University of Oklahoma today?
Yeah, it's an opportunity, but it's more than that. It's critical. It's vital to all these schools. I mean, I've been fortunate to work now 15 years with the University of Oklahoma and Joe Castiglione, and we've reinvented their media rights networks and deals 3 times over. It's interesting. The first time we did it, we created essentially a linear cable network with Fox. It was called Sooner Sports Television. And then we had a streaming component, but that was for short form and for some minor events. Eventually, SoonerSports.tv, the streaming component, became bigger and bigger. And by the end of 10 years, we reinvented it and became a streaming network, Sooner Vision on ESPN Plus, with football game and basketball games, a variety of events, because that's where the audience was. And now what we've done is they're moving into the SEC, so a lot of their games will be controlled by the SEC and placed on all the ESPN platforms and all the streaming services. But in addition, we've created a broadcast network throughout the state with Griffin Media that offers 250 hours of programming, an hour of programming a day, 5 to 6 days a week. And that's the level of interest that there is. And now broadcast has once again come to the fore in terms of being a valuable platform as part of the overall media portfolio that Oklahoma comes out there with. And look, the reality is that Oklahoma and every major college program out there is facing the addition of roughly $20 to $25 million worth of expenses per year on their budgets. And I think the deal is going to be fully announced this week, the antitrust settlement, but that's player compensation. And that's a substantial hit to the bottom line. So you need to be able to compensate your players, and the ways you do that from a school standpoint, from a conference standpoint, is you create more television programming, you create more sponsorship opportunities. It looks like the NCAA will allow for entitlements on the field, commercial entitlements. You're seeing Big 12 and Brett Yormark, who's perfect in this role, looking at potentially selling the entitlement to the conference. I saw the name All-State 12 being bandied about as a possibility. You're looking at the need to create more television programming, much like on a school level that Oklahoma is doing. You're looking at the almost immediate expansion of the college football playoffs, because there's going to be a need for more money. And there's already proposals now bouncing around for March Madness, expanding to 72 teams, 96 teams. Reason being is everybody needs more money. If you're going to be able to put up 20 to 30 different athletic programs in a major college athletic department, you're going to need a substantial amount of money to do so. And I'm Oklahoma and Texas, they timed this out right, and I was happy to be, aware of what was going on. And they made their move to the SEC at just the right time, because, SEC schools get substantial increases in ad revenues now because of the new ESPN deal that they have, an ABC deal, that they and the Big Ten are now seen as the two most lucrative conferences out there. It doesn't mean that they're going to be making huge amounts of money, in the sense that whatever they get is going to have to be plowed back into facilities and player compensation and a variety of different approaches to make their bottom lines work. But that's falling on every school right now, every conference. And if you're in the other three group Power Five, or you're in the group of five, or you're in what used to be called a mid-major, it's a severe cash crunch, and media and sponsorships are going to be some of the key ways to get yourself out of that pit. If you can't, then you're going to be cutting back on sports. It just seems like the math doesn't work unless you come up with more revenues to cover the costs of the athletes and the programs that you're offering up.
Yeah, no, we're seeing certain schools now come to us and seeking out new positions that are specifically revenue focused, even in terms of chief revenue officer, figuring out ways to drive new and incremental revenue streams. I want to shift gears for a second. Obviously, Warner Brothers Discovery submitted their matching bid earlier this week. What do you think the outcome is to this matching situation that the NBA is in right now between Warner Brothers and Amazon?
Look, I have no inside information to provide you with, but looking at the tea leaves that are out there, it sure looks like the NBA wants to maintain three partners. They've essentially, taken games away from ESPN, which with their acquiescence, the Turner package is no more. A lot of that's been shifted to NBC, and that allows you to bring in Amazon. There's strong streaming components in all of this. They've given Amazon a lot of these new properties they've created, the play-in tournament, the Emirates Cup, a lot of WNBA games, which are now going to be incredibly valuable going forward. I think that when I will say this, when the announcement was made by WBD that said, hey, we've matched and we're looking forward to signing our agreement, that's not the way media agreements work. They're usually not handled via a press release that says, or one party says, I'm ready to go. So my guess is that there will be discussions, if there haven't been already, between the league and WBD, and they will reach a settlement. There are, I think, a variety of approaches where it can work, and that WBD, maybe they won't be satisfied, but they can move forward. I think NBA wants to maintain what it's created. It's a remarkable structure from everything I've seen, the reports that are out there. I don't think they're looking for a fourth partner. I think WBD seems to be moving on in terms of the rights deals they're striking. French Open, a couple CFP games, Mountain West games. There's no question they're going to miss the NBA. Could they? I saw one piece of speculation out there. Could they serve as the production arm for Amazon? Yeah, potentially. That's what NBC does for the NFL for Amazon. I think there's a variety of solutions that can be developed so that everybody can shake hands and move on.
As we start to wrap up, are there any technology trends or developing stories that you're following over the next 12 to 24 months?
Well, the main thing is the ongoing move to DTC. I think the ESPN move to moving the flagship onto streaming is a major story going forward. I think one of the things I find really fascinating is the fact that given the NBA deal, the NFL's maybe thinking, gee, we undervalued our deal. And that when the Paramount sale comes to pass, that's a change of ownership, and you may see the NFL reopening that deal. And I think they will do well if they take that approach. I also see that, again, all the issues that we're running into, the RSNs will continue to lead to increased use of streaming and what's taking place. I'm also particularly interested in the COSM launch that's taking place, I think, in this month or next, in time for college football in Los Angeles. I want to see how that works in terms of a shared reality approach and how viable that is. But it's a sports bar writ very, very large and large, enormous screens. I'm interested in seeing how that plays out. And then, of course, the ongoing integration of betting and interactivity and ticket sales and e-commerce into all forms of sports media and viewership. It's the thing that gets to me about sports is through no particular design. It wasn't like a group of sports people came together and said, let's come up with a content category that everybody has to have regardless of the technology they roll out there with, and that is resistance to all the other issues in terms of re-airs and watching 5 years from now and piracy and all that, sports is it. Sports is it. You have to watch it live or near live, or you're out in terms of being able to talk about it, to tweet about it, to converse about it. And sports keeps on overriding every technology trend that's out there, and it becomes as vital for Amazon to do an NFL or an NBA deal as it was vital for RCA to do a Major League Baseball radio deal 100 years ago. That's really remarkable, and it's through no particular design. But I keep on thinking as new technologies come up, your go-to is going to continue to be sports, and those sports are going to continue to drive hardware sales and software sales and create large enough audiences that advertisers are going to flock to them, and that keeps on playing out again and again.
Best unscripted drama you've got. So behind me is, I'm sure you're familiar with that stadium behind me.
Yeah.
Can they repeat as national champions again in football?
It's going to be tough with the CFP, with the expanded CFP, because it only takes one loss, and now I think you've got potential for more stumbles. I mean, there are only single game eliminations. My loyalties are split. I spent a lot of time at Michigan, and I hope they do well. That being said, I've spent 15 years working with the University of Oklahoma. I think they've got some really interesting opportunities with the SEC. I'm hopeful for a Sooners-Wolverine final.
There you go.
In the CFP.
Lee, this has been, I could talk to you for a couple of hours here on this stuff. This is fascinating stuff, and it's unfolding every day. So thank you for the time this morning. Appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you down the line somewhere.
Glad to. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Lee.